Arguris, welcome. This is our third episode, which is exciting. It's almost a habit now that we are doing these conversations and these podcasts. And today might be the most interesting and exciting topic for many of us because what we're going to talk about is tools. And many of us in the business world, we just love tools, just like kids love toys. Software tools are stuff that we like to play with, and it gives me personally pleasure to be using tools to enhance the productivity of my work and whatnot. And just out of curiosity, do you know about approximately how many pieces of software you use on a regular basis?
On a regular basis, I mean, on a daily basis, it's a lot. I can't really count them, but then again, because it's a lot for different reasons, right? Different purposes. As a business, you have different processes. For every process, you're going to have a tool set. It's other, for us, we are also a software business, so we also develop software. So there is another tool set for that, but it's a business. It has also the financial side of the business, so you need tools to run that part. As a business, you also have, the payroll and everything, accounting, finance.
Yeah. A lot of software for everything now. Exactly. And add to that your phone and how many apps, or in other words, pieces of software you run on your phone.
That's awesome.
And it's mind blowing. Like I remember maybe 10 or 15 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I was using a web browser, Photoshop, word processor, Excel. Not much else. Maybe video editing software if I needed to edit videos. And I was probably using a few other things like, what was inside Windows and the unzip thing, so the file compression thing. But today it's like gone up exponentially. And as you said, there's a software for everything. You used to do payroll in Excel. Now you got a software for that automates a lot of things.
The thing is, you don't have one; you have multiple versions of it, right? So, I mean, there is I would dare to say that every day there is a new software coming out to, for something that's already there. So, how many tools you have for, let's say, human resources management or any other process, right? So, I mean, it does have to be a process. I mean, for editing videos, how many do you have, and how many are coming out on a daily basis? So. Yeah.
Quite a few. Well, yeah, video editing is a more complex issue, but now it's going browser based as well. So what used to require the power of your entire processor and computer can now do so inside of a browser. And so that's been an amazing development. Yeah. And so we come around to what you experience with companies when it comes to the complex tasks of forecasting demand and mixing in with the forecast your supply and other factors and yet more factors. And so you come to retail forecasting and replenishment planning. And as you walk around, or figuratively walk around and talk to companies and discuss with companies, what do you see? What kind of tech stack do they use? What are some common things?
I don't think it will be a surprise to say that the king of software for planning, retail planning, is spreadsheets. And whoever thinks that that's not true, I will challenge them to tell me that they're not using spreadsheets in any part of the process. I'm not saying it's the only tool. Sometimes it is, but even when there are other tools around, let's say more sophisticated, most of the times you're going to find some spreadsheets in between the process. So, and there is a good reason why this is happening, right? I mean, spreadsheets are very flexible. I mean, if you think of it, it's like you cannot call it programming language, although it has some extensions in this direction. But then again, it has some simplicity, right? It came out and it organized things in a way you can do some calculations. And to be frankly, you can do very complicated things with spreadsheets. So they have a lot of, potential around that. Whether you should be doing things in any context, that's another question. But then again, are they flexible? Yes, they are. Are they capable? Of course they are. Is it, a lot of material out there to help you, get on board and start doing things? I mean, from simple things to complex. Yes, that's also true. And I think I have, many times browsing the web, I come across to, many blogs or posts and some nice illustrations there representing, organizations, and there is like a stack of technology, and as a base of the whole stack, you usually find some spreadsheets. But then again, this is also the recipe for disaster, right? Because spreadsheets at some point will collapse, especially if you're trying to build something big on top of it, something really with a lot of scalability. Nevertheless, they are here for a very good reason. I mean, we in our business, if we do a conceptual design of something, I'll be honest, yes, we use spreadsheets initially even to model very complex concepts, because when you want to understand and illustrate a concept, spreadsheets are a very nice tool to do so. So there is a very good reason why they are out there. And for some things that are very useful and they should be used, but for other things like the topic you discussed, exactly, if you talk about retail merchandise planning, trying to make forecasts, either going to be forecast for demand or the lead times, and then you try to get all this together bundled and support your decisions, because forecasting is just an estimation for the future. You want that to base your decisions upon that, for example, to make your replenishment. Then, although you can build models around that in spreadsheets, and and it might even work if you don't go to very complex modeling, and even because there are a lot of, as I said, potential in spreadsheets. The issue goes back to scalability, which means that if you have a very small business, right, as a retail, you have a single store with, let's say, a few thousands of items, then it's probably perfectly fine to use that. And even do some stochastic modeling could be done in a way on spreadsheets. It could be done, but is that scalable? No, it isn't. And nobody claimed that spreadsheets should be there.
And you know what? I'm reminded. I just read an article recently I came across on LinkedIn, and it said that every business software, every business SaaS was once a spreadsheet. And I was like, is that right? And then the article brought a couple of examples. CRM was once a spreadsheet. Obviously, forecasting software and any type of quantitative analytics software also used to be a spreadsheet. Before there were the softwares, these things lived in spreadsheets. Project management is another example. And you can probably, I don't know to what extent this is true, but yes, it's true that for a huge proportion of software tools,
I agree,
it used to be and can still be in spreadsheets. Now, what do you think about the situation? Because I think this is more common. So it's not an either or thing. It would probably be an and thing, which can get quite messy, which is when you have a spreadsheet living next to an application that is supposed to do the same thing. We see this with project management all the time with CRM, like a salesperson would have their own little spreadsheet and keep track of things in the spreadsheet when they're supposed to do it in the CRM. How is it in your world, the world of retail forecasting?
It's exactly.
When they work together, when they work parallelly to one another, does it get messy? I bet it does.
I think that when, let's say, an organization invests heavily and as you said, I mean, most of these applications that are SaaS today, they used to be somehow spreadsheets, and some organizations, as I said before, based on the size, still today they might not need a solution, a heavier solution, a more complex solution to solve the problems. But then again, when you have a big organization and you need processes a little more standardized, then that's where you start looking at something, more than spreadsheets. And that's where you get to this enterprise software world, right? And for those solutions, it's interesting that, as you say, they might have evolved from initial concepts to be based simple spreadsheets, but then when they want to organize and structure and have more information into that and get more users and more standardized processes that don't break over time, more that, with spreadsheets, you might even lose control that everybody has its own version of, the process. which probably sometimes is not what you want. For example, in accounting or finance, it's not about what I want. There is, legislation about taxation. So it's not about how I want to operate, or in payroll, right? So there are some things standardized. So in this way, there is a good reason that, there is enterprise software around that to make sure that can cover this. The question, though, is that although, there is all this knowledge around that and all the sophistication, as you said, why would then still have side-by-side spreadsheets with this expensive, highly sophisticated software? And that probably is, to us in our world, based on our experience, it's a message that the solution doesn't cover some aspects. And this has to do with, the more complex a problem is to solve, like, for example, retail merchandising is quite complex. It has many different processes coming together to get to the point to, run your retail organization. So this complexity, when you try to, let's say, build it all into, let's say, a fully automated way and try to give a very simplistic user interface to the user. So with let's say, as less possible bits and pieces and clicks for them to run this process, then you realize that this cannot be done. And I think this is one of the major failures of enterprise software design over the past 3-4 decades. I mean, even when, most of these, solutions now being, let's say, on the cloud, call them SaaS, they usually come with a long implementation, as we call them, right? So they give you the option that, there is some configuration that you can do to tailor to the organization. That makes perfect sense, because no two organizations are going to be equal, or they're having exactly the same process. They're going to have bits and pieces that are going to be different, and you want to be able to tune on that. But even in this mindset, still you don't solve the problem, because even if you start with the approach of having a detailed design to understand your customer needs, and then try to build all these complex needs. Again, you're doing something complex, you're trying to, to simplify. When you simplify, you get into the trap of, as I said before, try to make it as simple as possible to use. But then again, even if you get it on the first hand, and it's fine, the organizations change over time. Again, the example with accounting and taxes. Legislation is not static, it changes. Retail, the same thing, and even worse, to be honest, because the consumer dynamics and how things are changing, it's almost a daily thing, right? And this means that you as an organization, there is dynamics that you need to adapt, which means that whatever you have designed 6 months or a year ago, it needs to be updated. And if you have designed a very complex process that then was implemented and tailored in a solution, you need to update that. And that's where things break up, and that's when you say, it's a time for me to use an Excel spreadsheet to prepare something, to feed it to my super duper solution, and then maybe get something out, to tune it, post-process it, and then move on to make my decisions. See, this is where things break, and this is why you're not going to avoid the spreadsheets being around.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's the question of whether the spreadsheet disrupts the flow, especially in teamwork. Because what tends to be the problem is when people do something in a spreadsheet that should, and it's one thing that you do something in a spreadsheet, but if what you do, or the result of that, or part of the result of that, should live in the application for others to make use of, or for the data to be correct and up to date and consistent. And when that retransfer or re-importing of data doesn't happen, or that updating of data doesn't happen, and then the spreadsheet takes a life of its own, that's when you run into problems. So there are scenarios where this thing is healthy and natural, as you said, in those scenarios. And then there is times when people get sloppy. And I think it's just, I know for myself, so I'm not blaming anybody. Sometimes, I get lazy and I do stuff that I'm supposed to enter up into the project management system, for example. And no, I have it on pieces of paper. I have it in a spreadsheet. I have it wherever written on my forehead. and it just doesn't go back to the system. And then that causes trouble because data is not up to date. Teammates can't see it. And so that's when it becomes problematic.
That's true. That's true. I mean, exactly. And sometimes, I mean, when the spreadsheet starts from, let's say, something small, just to, cope with, as we said, the changes. But then, they tend to grow even bigger and bigger. And then they get to have some chunks into them that is really too much. And that's what, start to deviate from the process. Because the other danger would be that, spreadsheets, I mean, the good scenario would be that there is a template version for the organization which is at least aligned for everybody, right? But there might be the occasion that everybody has its own version of that spreadsheet with some bits and pieces that are changed, which is that alignment is not there. And again, when you have a big organization to run and you start misaligning in these processes, then it's really hard for everybody to get to the end goal and end target together, right?
Oh, that's actually, that's spreadsheet hell. Before, they used to live in the cloud, and I remember we would like re-upload versions of the given document, and then, oh, I hope you're not editing it because then I can't, and then like editing and versions would collide, and then you wouldn't know whose version is the more recent because you both edited on the same date but didn't specify the time. And wow, that used to be so.
Yeah, so spreadsheets are now on the cloud, of course, and they synced in order to help users to interact all together. But still, again, if you're talking about a huge volume of data that needs to be fed into the spreadsheets to operate, and then you need to send it out somewhere again, it's not going to work when you have to do with heavy stuff, right? Because they weren't designed for this, and that's the problem.
The heavy stuff is one thing, so the scalability aspect of it, but there is another big issue if you are over dependent on spreadsheets. And that, I think, is the question of who can develop it and knowledge of the whole system being usually the resort of just one person in the organization, which creates a heavy dependency on that one person. Because usually what happens is that these mega complex spreadsheets that are used on a day-to-day basis by teams are usually designed by one person. And then there are usually a few other people who sort of understand what's going on and what to do where and what to tweak. But when something major needs to be changed or altered in the way the spreadsheet functions, then if you don't have access to that person, then hell can break loose.
Yeah, that's true. And that's not also again, because we focus on spreadsheets, but then again, that's also the thing that, the built in-house is not only the spreadsheets, right? The spreadsheets is something that it's easy to do, and because you don't need to have the super, let's say, programming skills, right? Or, the software engineering side of things. You might, get something quick with, meaningful, but then again, you don't have to be like that. So as you said, and another danger with that is that you might have somebody, joining your organization and bringing his own spreadsheet in, which means he might bring value to the organization because he's bringing his own processes. But then again, if there are good and valid processes, you gain from it, right? But if he goes out, as you're saying, he might take the spreadsheet with him. Of course, by that you might say that I do have my own version, but if you haven't developed that and that's already developed, baked in and brought to the organization, probably you don't have the knowledge and you don't understand it fully. And if you miss that person, then you're missing also, the whole recipe around that. And that's also what happens with, if it's not a spreadsheet, but then you build in-house. And I mean, a retail organization is just a software house, right? It might, has, of course, his IT department. It might have some processes there, but if things are not happening in a proper way and the knowledge is not staying with the organization, but it is with those that has the concepts to build the tooling, then, when these people leave the organization, you're going to miss that knowledge and you might not be able to maintain or understand or extend that solution. As we said before, things are not static anymore, right? I mean, the fact that, changes are happening, it means that I'm not saying you're going to rewrite everything on a daily basis. I'm not saying that software companies are doing that. I'm just saying that there's going to be a base of things that will remain, but there is, you need to have some, availability there, and to account for all the changes that are happening and be able to adapt your systems into this direction. So when we design software for, complex processes like, enterprise tooling, we need to be flexible. It's not like, for example, a browser. I'm not saying it's a simple thing, but then again, the user experience and what you're going to do with it, right? It's kind of, there are some specific paths and some stories that users can do with a browser. I mean, it's a consumer tool. Everybody follows that up, and it's easier to move in this direction. But in enterprise tooling, the process, as I said, is not something, I'm not going to the browser, open up, click it, and, browse the internet, hear some music. As you said, now even edit a video, whatever that is, which is, let's say, an app on the browser, working on this direction. The same process will change, right? And the process changing, meaning that, some of the underlying tooling that you have developed needs to also adapt in this direction. So it's a different story, the enterprise software. And for this to work, I think that there is a change in the mindset that we need to have, how we develop it and how we support it. And in this direction, I think that it helps to, think about software in general and enterprise software maybe 20 years ago. Maybe that's too way back, but think of the change. As we said before spreadsheets or any other software was what we call on-premise. It was, you have to install it in your laptop, you have to install it in your data center, right? Nowadays, it's highly unlikely that somebody thinks about, having my own data center or, installing the, a version. Everything is SaaS now. It's software as a service. And what that means to, to not get overexcited about it, it means that you used to have your own data center and the people who were maintaining that, right? The technicians, administrators, whatever. And now you have, passed on this to somebody else. And that's a good move because, this scalability, it might
make sense in every aspect and every sense.
It's much more efficient, probably. It's less resources consumed, it's get updated. And it's a good thing to outsource. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad direction going, to the cloud. Well, that was the first thing. And that was the first thing when, the concept of, managed services also popped out. It's about that, exactly. You don't have to, have distributed all these resources. I mean, human resources as well, the admins and everything, but also, the technical resources, the servers, the data centers, all these things, they're consolidating, and for a good reason. It's a scale that really proves that it should be the direction to go. And as I said, that was the first step. Maybe we should start thinking for some areas like the enterprise software and its complexity, we also need to, extend these managed services from being, I'm managing a server, some application that's running, that I'm managing also some parts of the tool, right? So my vendor, right, is there to support some layer of what we said before. Some things in my business are changing in my organization, the processes based on the dynamics on a daily basis, and maybe I need this tailoring to happen on the fly. And to add more to that, we have seen that probably it's the last 5, 6, I don't know, maybe a decade thing, that the new global term, SaaS is already old. Now we have, data science and artificial intelligence, AI. These are the buzzwords that are out everywhere. And most of the customers we have, and I think that everybody in any industry and retail as well, the organizations, they are, concerned, how do we, get on board in this direction? What do we do? Do we get our own data science teams in-house, right? How do we do that? What does it take to get there?
I'm super glad you brought this up, because I thought we were going to talk about tools and software, but now we are talking about people, which is great because everything comes down to people. And that's a super point. So it used to be that, okay, the beginning of the process, which was sort of parallel, it's two processes going side by side, is that you were outsourcing computing capabilities like data center, like software and processes. So there was this outsourcing sort of on the software side, but also on the human processes side. And what started to happen was that the companies, multinationals, would start outsourcing, low value added activities overseas. And then they started moving up the value chain, and they would start to outsource even higher value activities and more precious and more valued activities as well. And what we're seeing now is even some core operations are being outsourced by mega corporations. For example, not many people know, or at least many people are surprised when I tell them this, but did you know that, for example, companies like Google and Apple will outsource part of their development work, and not the cheesy weasy low end stuff, but like the hardcore development, to external corporations, to outside organizations? So you would think that like Apple, especially, it's, probably with manufacturing and IT and programming and everything, that it's this one bubble and it's like all closed up. But no, like many applications and partial processes from the App Store and the Apple tools that you use every day are developed outside of Apple by people who are not employed with Apple.
It's amazing, right?
And if big corporations are doing it, maybe it's time that more traditional industries caught onto this thinking as well.
I think that, they will be forced to, right? So as I said before, if you think because there are, many changes happening in parallel, right? So as I said, enterprise software is changing. And if we go to even the algorithmical nature of, how these models are built, right? These models are also changing, right? To nowadays, and it's very common to hear, how, machine learning and, even deep learning, this kind of tooling and processes helped, to automate some processes. For example, very lately, I think that there is a new buzz. I think I don't want to mention it specifically, but regarding conversational AI, new tooling is coming out, and everybody's questioning what does it mean, and how's this going to help. So if we think about it, these different processes and different ways to develop the software in order to make better decisions, for example, for the organization, they require different skills, and these skills is something that they're not available broadly out there, first of all. And even if it is, it's not about only the skills. They need to be adapted to the industry. For example, you're in retail, right? So it's not the same with banking, finance, insurance, manufacturing, right? So you don't only need to have the skills, you need to have, bind with the industry. And this complexity, right, it's very hard to manage when at the same side, because think of it, as an organization, as a little organization, you have to innovate in different directions. You have to innovate in how you serve your customers, your retail existence, depends on that. But you also have to innovate in technology. And in other sectors, can you do all of it, right? So for the example you gave already, even the big tech giants, they are sourcing something that everybody can consider core to them, right? So you need to start thinking, because it's a global market, right, that what are your biggest strengths and when you need to heavily invest, and what are the other things that you probably cannot innovate in everything, and start thinking, how can I do it with some of my external partners, for example? Can they help me in this direction? Because again, as an organization, you need to start thinking about, do you focus on running your business or in running systems, right? As a retail organization, you have to start thinking about that. Where do you put the weight on, right?
Yeah. Wow, Argyris, this topic takes us real far, and I really enjoyed this conversation, and there was some surprising twists in it. So I wouldn't have thought that we would end up talking about people and and humans, because the scope was supposed to be so much around tools and software. But I'm glad we picked this topic. I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to the next conversation.
That was great. And I hope that everybody will have the chance to, hear our today's podcast, and also, have the opportunity to see and hear our other podcasts. And of course, we would really like to, to hear recommendations about what are, topics they want to cover in our next podcasts. And of course, reach out to us with any questions around that. It's always good, as you say, to debate and discuss about it.
Yeah, let's mention the email address that people can use to get in touch with Kivos. Do you have something like info@kivos.ai or?
I think that, starting with, getting to the kivos.ai on the web, you will find all the links to get in touch with us. And of course, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Argyris Mokios. You can, find me there. And of course, feel free to message me and, start a discussion.
Yes. Well, thank you for listening and watching, and we are out.